The scent of lemon polish clung to my skin like a desperate lover. My back ached as I scrubbed the mahogany dining table that stretched like a dark sea across the room. Outside, rain tapped against floor-to-ceiling windows, a gentle percussion accompanying the quiet hum of the penthouse. 6 months I'd worked in this glass and steel fortress in the sky, and still, I felt like an intruder. Sophia, the West Wing still needs attention. Mrs. Winters, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. Her steel-gray hair pulled so tightly it seemed to stretch her wrinkles smooth. Mr. Castellano has guests arriving tomorrow evening. I nodded, keeping my eyes down. Yes, ma'am. I'll finish here first. 13 floors above the city, I moved like a ghost through rooms I'd never be able to afford to stand in if I wasn't cleaning them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I touched everything that belonged to Dominic Castellano, yet he'd never once noticed me, which was exactly how I needed it to stay. As Mrs. Winters's footsteps faded, I pressed a hand to my abdomen, a gesture that had become unconscious over the past few months. Beneath my loose uniform, a secret grew. 5 months along now, my daughter. His daughter. A truth that would destroy everything if discovered. I moved to the kitchen, my reflection distorted in the polished surfaces of professional-grade appliances that cost more than my entire childhood home. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, my blonde hair pulled back severely into a practical bun. I'd become expert at invisibility. The irony of life's cruel twists wasn't lost on me. 8 months ago, before I knew who he really was, before I understood the empire of fear he'd built, I'd spent one night with him. Just one. A different name. A different place. He'd been Dominic Santos then, a businessman I'd met while serving drinks at a charity gala. Not Dominic Castellano, the man whose name was whispered in fear across the city. I pulled my grandmother's silver locket from beneath my uniform, the cool metal a comfort against my palm. Her voice seemed to whisper from it, "Strength doesn't mean you never fall, Sophia. It means you always get back up." I'd been getting back up my entire life, but never had the stakes been so high. The baby kicked, a flutter like butterfly wings, my miracle and my burden. "Ms. Winters says you're behind schedule." The voice froze me in place, deep, quiet, with that slight Italian accent that softened certain consonants. I'd only heard it in passing, through doorways or around corners, never directed at me. I turned slowly, my heart thundering against my ribs. Dominic Castellano stood in the doorway. One shoulder leaned against the frame. In his tailored charcoal suit, he looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine, but the hardness in his eyes told a different story. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the strong lines of his face, handsome in the way that beautiful predators are handsome. He wasn't alone. A man in a black suit, one of his ever-present security detail, hovered just beyond the doorway. "Mr. Castellano." I lowered my gaze, gripping the edge of the counter behind me. "I apologize. I'll work faster." He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched until I risked glancing up. His eyes, dark as espresso, studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Did he recognize me? No. Impossible. The lighting had been dim that night, and I looked different now. Thinner, paler, my hair a different style. "You're new." It wasn't a question. 6 months, sir." His gaze swept over me, and I fought the urge to cross my arms protectively over my stomach. Instead, I forced myself to stand straight, hands at my sides, eyes properly lowered as Mrs. Winters had instructed all staff to do in his presence. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia, sir. Sophia Reyes." A small crease appeared between his brows. "You look familiar." My throat constricted. "I don't think so, sir. I've mostly worked days when you're not home." He made a non-committal sound, then checked his watch. "Platinum. Worth more than a year of my salary. Carry on." Relief washed through me as he turned to leave, but then he paused, looking back over his shoulder. "The West Wing. There's no rush. I've canceled tomorrow's meeting." Then he was gone, his security shadow following, leaving only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the thundering of my heart. I released the breath I'd been holding, legs suddenly weak. 6 months I'd managed to avoid direct contact with him, and now this. Had he recognized me? No. If he had, his reaction would have been different. To him, I was just another servant. Forgettable. But he'd remembered my name. The small apartment I shared with my cousin Elena was a 30-minute bus ride from Castellano's luxury building. After swiping my keycard at the employee exit, I pulled my coat tight against the November chill and hurried to the bus stop, constantly glancing over my shoulder, a habit I couldn't shake since learning who Dominic really was. My neighborhood was a patchwork of dollar stores, laundromats, and family-owned restaurants with fading signs. Our building stood between a bodega and a cash-checking place, the stairwell perpetually smelling of cooking oil and cigarettes. Home, such as it was. "That you, Sophie?" Elena called as I locked the door behind me. She appeared from the kitchenette, wooden spoon in hand, her nurse's scrubs still on from her hospital shift. Her eyes immediately went to my stomach. "How's my little niece today? Active?" I smiled, the first genuine one of the day, like she's training for the Olympics. All kickboxing. Elena was the only person who knew my secret, both about the baby and its father. She'd been horrified when I'd taken the job at Castellano's penthouse. But we both knew the irony. It was the perfect hiding place. Who would look for his unknown, pregnant one-night stand working as a maid in his own home? "You look exhausted," she said, returning to the small pot of beans she was stirring. "Sit before you fall." I sank onto our second-hand couch, kicking off my sensible shoes. He spoke to me today. The stirring stopped. Elena appeared in the doorway, alarm widening her eyes. "Castellano? Directly?" I nodded, recounting the brief interaction. "Did he recognize you?" "I don't think so," I said, but uncertainty gnawed at me. It was dark that night, and I had my hair down, wore makeup. I looked different. Elena set the spoon down and came to sit beside me. "Sophie, maybe it's time to reconsider. My friend in Phoenix said you could stay with her until—" "And do what?" I interrupted. "Have this baby with no job, no insurance, in a city where I know no one? The pay at Castellanos is better than anything else I could get, and the insurance—" I trailed off, both of us knowing the reality. Without that job, I couldn't afford proper prenatal care. "It's dangerous," Elena insisted. "If he ever found out, he won't." I squeezed her hand. "I'm just another maid to him, invisible." But as I said it, I remembered the intensity in his gaze, that moment of scrutiny that had felt like being under a microscope. Had there been a flicker of recognition? Later, in the shower, I let the hot water sluice over my aching body, one hand cradling my growing belly. Through the thin walls, I could hear the television Elena had turned on, a news report about another business that had mysteriously burned down after refusing protection from unnamed sources. I knew what that meant now. Castellano's empire wasn't built on legitimate business alone. The charities and corporate holdings were facades for something darker. That night, as I lay in bed, I remembered how I'd met him, the charity gala where I'd been hired to serve drinks, wearing a black dress that matched all the other servers. He'd noticed me, really seen me, when I'd caught a tray of champagne flutes that another server had knocked over. Somehow, I'd managed to save every glass, a feat of balance that had drawn applause from nearby guests. "Impressive reflexes," he'd said, appearing at my elbow as I set the tray down at the service station. I'd looked up into those dark eyes and felt something electric pass between us. He hadn't been wearing a wedding ring. He'd introduced himself as Dominic Santos, a real estate developer. His smile had transformed his face, softening the hard edges. We'd talked for only minutes, but when my shift ended, he'd been waiting outside, one night. One beautiful, passionate night, where I'd felt seen for the first time in years. Then he'd disappeared, leaving only a hotel keycard and the memory of his touch. No number, no way to reach him. It had hurt, but I'd moved on. Until the pregnancy test 2 weeks later. It had taken me another month to discover who he really was. A photo in a business magazine at Elena's doctor's office. Dominic Castellano, not Santos, at the opening of a new luxury hotel. The article had mentioned his varied business interests and connections to old New York families. Euphemisms for what everyone knew but no one said aloud. By then, I'd already decided to keep the baby, my baby, mine alone. A sharp kick jolted me from my thoughts. "Shh, little one," I whispered, stroking my belly. "Everything's going to be fine, I promise." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. The next morning dawned gray and threatening snow. I arrived at the penthouse early, as always, entering through the service elevator with 2 other maids. Mrs. Winters met us in the staff area, her clipboard already in hand. "Change of plans," she announced. "Mr. Castellano will be working from home today. Sophia, you'll handle the main living areas. Maria, the guest rooms need preparation for weekend visitors. Lucia, the kitchen and dining room." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Winters, I thought I was scheduled for the West Wing today." Her lips thinned. "Mr. Castellano specifically requested you for the main areas." The other maids glanced at me with curiosity and something else. Concern, perhaps. Everyone knew it was better to remain invisible to the boss. I moved through my tasks with mechanical precision, dusting shelves lined with leather-bound books that looked untouched, polishing surfaces already gleaming. The penthouse was eerily quiet, except for the occasional murmur of voices from Castellano's closed office door, where he and several men had been meeting since morning. Just before noon, the door opened. 4 men in expensive suits filed out, nodding deferentially to Castellano, who stood in the doorway. I kept my head down, focusing intently on arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase across the room. "Sophia." His voice carried across the space between us. I looked up, my hands stilling on the stems. "Yes, Mr. Castellano? Bring coffee to my office. Black, no sugar." "Right away, sir." As I prepared the coffee in the kitchen, I could feel my pulse racing. This was exactly what I'd been avoiding for months. Direct interaction, being alone with him. I checked my appearance in the reflection of a cabinet door, making sure my uniform hung loosely enough to conceal my condition. Balancing the coffee cup on a silver tray, I approached his office door and knocked softly. "Come in." Dominic sat behind a massive desk, his back to floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. Snow had begun to fall, fat flakes swirling against the glass. The office was minimalist, all clean lines and muted colors, with a few strategic pieces of art that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. I set the coffee down carefully, keeping my eyes lowered. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Look at me." The command, softly spoken, sent a shiver down my spine. Slowly, I raised my gaze to meet his. He studied me with that same intensity from yesterday, his expression unreadable. "I know we've met before," he said finally. My heart stuttered. "Sir?" "I never forget a face." He leaned forward slightly, "especially one as distinctive as yours." I kept my expression neutral, though panic clawed at my throat. "Perhaps you've seen me around the building, sir." A slight smile curved his lips, not reaching his eyes. "Perhaps." He picked up the coffee cup, took a sip, and nodded dismissively. "That will be all." I turned to leave, relief flooding through me, when disaster struck. As I reached the door, my foot caught on the edge of the plush carpet. I stumbled, throwing out a hand to catch myself against the wall. The sudden movement sent a sharp pain through my abdomen, and I gasped, my other hand instinctively going to my stomach. The sound of a chair scraping back. "Sophia?" I straightened quickly, but the damage was done. I turned to find him standing, his gaze fixed on where my hand still rested protectively. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something colder. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway, my voice barely audible. "Yes, sir." His jaw tightened. "Does Mrs. Winters know?" "No," I admitted. "I've been careful." He circled the desk slowly, approaching me with the measured steps of a predator. "How far along?" My mouth went dry. 5 months. Something flickered in his eyes, a calculation, perhaps. I watched as he counted back mentally, saw the exact moment when realization struck. His gaze snapped back to my face, really seeing me for the first time. "The charity gala," he said softly. "The Harrington Foundation. You caught a tray of champagne." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "I should get back to work, Mr. Castellano." I reached for the door handle, but his hand shot out, slamming against the wood panel, keeping it closed. He was close now. Too close. The scent of his cologne surrounding me, bringing back memories I'd fought to suppress. Who are you, really? His voice was dangerously quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs. Trapped between Dominic Castellano and the door, I felt the walls of my carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. I told you who I am, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Sofia Reyes, your maid. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for deception. That night, you told me your name was Sofia Alvarez. I use my mother's maiden name sometimes, I lied, the words bitter on my tongue, for privacy. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to my stomach, then back to my face. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but a cold calculation that frightened me more. And the father? He asked, his voice deceptively casual. I swallowed hard. Not in the picture. Is that so? He leaned closer, his arm still braced against the door. Interesting coincidence, then, that you'd end up working in my home. I needed a job with health insurance, I said, which was true enough. The agency placed me here. A knock at the door saved me from further questioning. Dominic's security chief's voice came through the wood. Boss, Vitelli's on the line. Says it's urgent. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, allowing me space to breathe again. This conversation isn't finished, he said quietly. Then louder. Come in, Marco. I slipped past the bodyguard, feeling Dominic's eyes on me as I escaped. My hands trembled so badly I had to clasp them together as I made my way to the staff bathroom, locking myself inside. Leaning against the sink, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Pale face, wide eyes filled with fear. He knew, or at least he suspected. The father of my child was not some nameless boyfriend, but him, Dominic Castellano, the man whose floors I polished and whose laundry I folded. What would he do with that knowledge? The baby kicked, as if sensing my distress, and I placed a gentle hand over the spot. It's okay, I whispered. We're okay. Another lie. By some miracle, I managed to avoid Dominic for the rest of the day. When my shift ended, I changed quickly in the staff locker room, pulling on my coat and hat before slipping out through the service entrance. The snow had stopped, leaving the city dusted in white that was already turning to gray slush along the curbs. I was halfway to the bus stop when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up alongside me. My steps faltered as the rear window slid down, revealing Marco, Dominic's security chief. Ms. Reyes, he said, his face expressionless. Mr. Castellano would like to speak with you. It wasn't a request. I glanced around, weighing my options. Running was pointless. Where would I go? And causing a scene would only make things worse. I need to get home, I said. My cousin is expecting me. We'll inform her you'll be late. He opened the door. Please. The interior of the SUV was warm and smelled of leather. Marco took my address and phone number, presumably to contact Elena, then sat across from me, his presence imposing in the confined space. He didn't speak as the driver navigated through evening traffic, taking us not back to the penthouse, as I'd expected, but toward the outskirts of the city. After 20 minutes, we pulled up to a gated estate. Tall iron fences surrounded the property, with security cameras positioned at regular intervals. The gates swung open automatically, and we proceeded up a long driveway flanked by bare winter trees. The house, mansion really, was an imposing structure of stone and glass, set back from the road and illuminated by strategic lighting that cast dramatic shadows across its facade. 2 more security guards stood at attention near the entrance. This way, Marco said, leading me inside. The interior was a study in restrained luxury, clearly expensive but not ostentatious. No photographs adorned the walls, only carefully selected artwork. It felt more like a high-end hotel than a home. Marco led me to a sitting room where a fire crackled in a stone hearth. He'll be with you shortly, he said, then left, closing the door behind him. Alone, I perched on the edge of an armchair, too nervous to appreciate the comfort it offered. What did Dominic want? To threaten me? Pay me off? My hands unconsciously went to my stomach, protective. The door opened and Dominic entered, now dressed in a casual sweater and slacks that somehow looked as expensive as his suits. He'd loosened his hair from its styled perfection, and it fell slightly across his forehead, softening his appearance in a way that reminded me painfully of that night 8 months ago. "Are you hungry?" he asked, surprising me with the mundane question. I shook my head, though I hadn't eaten since breakfast. He must have seen through the lie because he frowned slightly. "You should eat, for the baby, if not for yourself." The mention of the baby sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. "Why am I here, Mr. Castellano?" He crossed to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, bringing one to me. "Dominic," he corrected. "And I think you know why." I accepted the water but didn't drink. "I don't want anything from you." A smile, cold and without humor, curved his lips. "Is that why you infiltrated my home? Because you don't want anything?" "I didn't infiltrate anything," I said, heat rising to my face. "I took a job. I needed work. Of all the places in this city," he said, sitting across from me, "you just happened to end up in my employ, while pregnant with what could very well be my child." "Is my child," I corrected without thinking. His eyes darkened. "So you admit it?" I set the water glass down with a sharp click. "I'm not admitting or denying anything. What I am saying is that this baby is mine. Mine to raise, mine to protect." "If that child is mine," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "then it's a Castellano. Do you understand what that means?" I did, which was exactly why I'd hidden the truth. The baby of a man like him would never truly be free, would be born into a world of danger, violence, and moral compromise, a world I'd spent my life trying to escape. "I understand that you're a powerful man," I said carefully, "with powerful enemies. And you thought the solution was to keep my own child from me?" The edge in his voice made me flinch. "I didn't know who you were when we met," I said. "You told me your name was Santos, that you were in real estate. You disappeared after that night, left me with nothing but a hotel keycard." He had the grace to look slightly abashed at that, but his expression quickly hardened again. "And when you discovered who I really was?" "I was already pregnant," I said. "And I'd already learned enough about Dominic Castellano to be terrified of him." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "What exactly do you think you know about me?" The fire popped loudly in the grate, sending sparks against the screen. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving fresh snow against the windows. "I know you're not just a businessman," I said quietly. "I know the restaurants and clubs and construction companies are just the surface. I know people disappear when they cross you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And knowing all that, you thought the best plan was to lie to me? To hide in plain sight and hope I wouldn't notice? Put that way, it did sound foolish, reckless even, but fear makes people do desperate things. I was afraid," I admitted. "Not just for myself, for her." His eyes dropped to my stomach. "Her?" Something in his voice made me look up. The hardness in his expression had softened, almost imperceptibly. "It's a girl," I said. "I found out last month." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze still fixed on where his daughter grew beneath my heart. When he spoke again, his voice was different, still controlled, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "You'll stay here tonight," he said, rising. "We have things to discuss, but you need rest and food." It wasn't a request. Before I could protest, he'd pressed a button on the wall, and a middle-aged woman appeared almost instantly. "Maria will show you to a guest room," he said. "I have business to attend to, but I'll have dinner sent up. We'll talk in the morning." "My cousin," I began, "has been informed that you're safe and will be home tomorrow," he cut in. "Marco has seen to it." With that, he left, and I found myself following Maria up a sweeping staircase to a bedroom larger than my entire apartment. The 4-poster bed was made up with linens that felt like clouds when I tentatively touched them. A bathroom adjoined the bedroom, complete with a soaking tub and shower that could have fit 3 people. "Mr. Castellano said to make yourself comfortable," Maria said, opening a closet to reveal a selection of women's clothing in various sizes. "Dinner will be up shortly. Is there anything else you need?" I shook my head, too overwhelmed to speak. When she left, I sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing tears to spill down my cheeks. Everything I'd feared had come to pass. Yet here I was, not dead or threatened, but installed in a luxury guest room like some sort of precious object. That thought sent a chill through me. Was that what I was now? Another possession for Dominic Castellano to control? Dinner arrived on a covered tray, a fragrant pasta dish, salad, bread still warm from the oven, and a dessert of fresh berries and cream. Despite my anxiety, hunger won out, and I ate every bite. Afterward, I took a long shower, letting the hot water soothe my aching back. The borrowed nightgown fit loosely over my bump, the silk cool against my skin. I climbed into the enormous bed, certain I wouldn't sleep a wink. Yet exhaustion claimed me almost immediately, pulling me down into darkness. I woke to sunlight streaming through partially opened curtains. For a moment, I didn't recognize where I was, reaching instinctively for the familiar shape of my narrow bed at home. Instead, my hand met expensive sheets and empty space. Reality crashed back. Dominic's house. His discovery. The precarious position I now found myself in. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Come in," I called, pulling the covers higher. It wasn't Maria, but Dominic himself who entered, already dressed for the day in another impeccable suit. He carried a tray with what looked like breakfast and set it on a small table near the window. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his tone oddly formal. I nodded, suddenly conscious of my disheveled appearance. Tangled hair, borrowed nightgown, face puffy from sleep and yesterday's tears. "Good." He gestured to the tray. "You should eat. Then we need to talk." The breakfast was simple but perfect. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and orange juice. Dominic didn't join me but stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, his back to me. "Why did you run?" he asked suddenly. "After you learned who I was, why not come to me directly?" I set down my fork. "Because I was afraid you'd take her from me." He turned, his expression incredulous. "Take her?" "Men like you," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. "With power, with money, they get what they want. And if what they want is a child without the inconvenience of its mother, they find a way." His jaw tightened. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd tear an infant from its mother's arms?" "I don't know you," I said simply. "Not really. One night 8 months ago doesn't make us intimates. What I do know is your reputation." He moved toward me then, his steps measured, deliberate. "And what exactly is my reputation, Sophia?" The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. Part fear, part something else I didn't want to examine. "That you're dangerous," I said. "That you hurt people who cross you. That your business isn't entirely legitimate." A cold smile curved his lips. All true. His admission, so casually delivered, stole my breath. I pushed back from the table, putting distance between us. "Then you understand why I was afraid," I said. "Why I still am." Something flashed in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or hurt. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He checked it, his expression darkening. "I have to take this," he said. "Stay here. We're not finished." As soon as he left, I was on my feet, moving to the closet to find something to wear. I had to get out of here, back to Elena, back to some semblance of control over my own life. The borrowed jeans fit over my bump, and I found a sweater loose enough to be comfortable. I was lacing up my boots when the door opened again. I expected Dominic, but it was Marco who entered, his expression grave. "Ms. Reyes?" he said. "Mr. Castellano asked me to escort you home." Relief washed through me. "Now?" He nodded. "He's been called away on urgent business. He asked me to tell you that he'll be in touch." The same black SUV was waiting outside. As we drove back toward the city, I stared out at the winter landscape, my mind racing. What did "he'll be in touch" mean? What happened next? Marco remained silent until we reached my apartment building. As he opened my door, he finally spoke. "Mr. Castellano values family above all else," he said, his voice oddly gentle. "Remember that." Was it a warning or reassurance? I couldn't tell. Elena rushed to the door as I entered, pulling me into a fierce hug. "Dios mío, Sophie. I was so worried. That man who called said you were with Castellano." "I'm okay," I assured her, though I wasn't sure that was true. "But he knows, Elena. About the baby." Her face paled. "What happened? Did he hurt you?" "No," I said, sinking onto our couch. He was, I don't know, controlled. Cold at times, but not violent. What does he want? The question echoed my own fears. I don't know. We didn't finish our conversation. Elena sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. Sophie, you need to leave. Today. Go to Phoenix. Or even further. Before he decides. Decides what? What you're worth to him, she said, her voice breaking. Men like him, they own people. And if he thinks that baby is his, the baby kicked, a sharp jab that made me wince. She is his. Then you're already in his world, Elena whispered. And God help you get out. 3 days passed with no word from Dominic. I returned to work at the penthouse, but Mrs. Winters informed me that Mr. Castellano was traveling and not expected back until the weekend. The routine of cleaning, polishing, and fading into the background should have been comforting. A return to normalcy. But every sound made me jump. Every ring of the elevator sent my heart racing. Elena watched me with worried eyes each evening, her suggestions that I run growing more insistent. But where would I go that a man like Dominic Castellano couldn't find me? And more importantly, did I want to spend my life looking over my shoulder, raising my daughter in fear? On the 4th day, as I was changing the linens in one of the guest bedrooms, Mrs. Winters appeared in the doorway. Sophia, she said, her tone unusually gentle. You have a visitor in the staff room. My hands stilled on the sheets. A visitor? A Mr. Marco Russo. Her eyes flicked briefly to my stomach, then back to my face. Mr. Castellano's associate. So she knew. Of course she did. Nothing happened in this household without Mrs. Winters' knowledge. I wondered what else she knew, how much Dominic had told her. Marco was waiting, his imposing figure making the small staff break room seem even smaller. He stood when I entered, his expression unreadable. Ms. Reyes, he said with a slight nod. Mr. Castellano requests your presence this evening. Not again. I can't, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. I have plans with my cousin. Marco's expression didn't change. Mr. Castellano was quite insistent. He'll send a car at 7. It wasn't a request, and we both knew it. I nodded once, defeated, and Marco left without another word. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxiety. When I returned home, Elena was already there, having switched shifts with a coworker. One look at my face, and she knew. He's summoning you again, she said, the words flat with resignation. I nodded, moving to our small bathroom to shower. A car is coming at 7, Elena followed, leaning against the doorframe as I turned on the water. And if you refuse? We both knew the answer to that. Men like Dominic Castellano weren't accustomed to hearing no. I have to know what he wants, I said. More to convince myself than her, what he intends to do. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Just promise me something, Sophie. Promise you won't let him separate you from that baby. I placed a hand over my swollen belly, feeling a tiny foot or elbow press against my palm. Never, I whispered. I promise. At 7 o'clock precisely, a different car arrived. Not the SUV, but a sleek black sedan with a driver who introduced himself as Anthony. He held the door for me with professional courtesy, then sealed me inside the warm interior. As we pulled away from my building, I caught a glimpse of Elena watching from our window, her face a mask of worry. This time, we headed not to the estate, but to a restaurant in the heart of the city. The building was unmarked, except for a small brass plaque reading Vincenzo's. A doorman opened my car door and escorted me inside, where a host was already waiting. Ms. Reyes, he said with a deferential nod. Mr. Castellano is expecting you. The restaurant was dimly lit and intimate, with only about a dozen tables, most of them occupied by well-dressed couples and groups speaking in hushed tones. The host led me to a private alcove in the back, separated from the main dining room by heavy velvet curtains. Dominic rose as I approached, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Something flickered in his eyes as they swept over me. I'd worn the nicest dress I owned, a simple black wrap style that accommodated my growing belly. Sophia, he said, coming around to pull out my chair. Thank you for coming. As if I'd had a choice, but I simply nodded, allowing him to seat me before he returned to his own chair across the small table. A waiter appeared immediately, pouring water and presenting menus. Dominic ordered wine for himself and sparkling water for me without asking, then turned to me once we were alone. "You look well," he said, his eyes moving to my stomach. "How are you feeling?" The polite question, so at odds with the power dynamic between us, caught me off guard. "Fine," I answered cautiously. "The baby is very active." Something softened in his expression. "Is she kicking?" I nodded, unconsciously placing a hand over the spot where my daughter was currently doing what felt like gymnastics. Dominic watched the movement with undisguised fascination. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering over the table. The request was so unexpected that I froze, unsure how to respond. This was the man I'd been hiding from for months, whose power terrified me. Yet here he was, asking permission to feel his child move. Slowly I nodded. He moved his chair around the table, closer to mine, and reached out with a tentative hand. I guided it to the spot where the baby was most active, pressing his palm against the taut skin of my belly through the fabric of my dress. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if on cue, she kicked, a strong, definite movement against his hand. Dominic's sharp intake of breath was audible, his eyes widening with something like wonder. "That's," he began, then seemed at a loss for words. "Your daughter," I finished for him, my voice barely above a whisper. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we were just two people connected by the miracle growing beneath our joined hands. Not employer and employee, not powerful man and vulnerable woman, just a father and mother, feeling their child move for the first time together. The waiter's return broke the spell. Dominic withdrew his hand and moved back to his side of the table, his expression once again composed, as he ordered for both of us after a brief consultation. When we were alone again, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "I've had you investigated," he said without preamble. The blunt admission sent ice through my veins. "Investigated?" He nodded, taking a sip of his wine. "Sophia Reyes, 26. Parents deceased. Car accident when you were 17. Raised after that by your grandmother, who passed 3 years ago. Associate's degree in business administration. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. You've worked a series of administrative and service jobs, none for very long. You live with your cousin, Elena Reyes, a nurse at Metropolitan Hospital. Hearing my life reduced to a clinical summary made me feel exposed, violated. You had no right. I had every right," he countered, his voice hardening slightly. "You're carrying my child. That doesn't make me your property to investigate," I said, anger temporarily overriding fear. A slight smile curved his lips. "There it is." "What?" "The fire I glimpsed that night at the gala," he said. "When you told that drunk businessman to keep his hands to himself. You're afraid of me. I can see it. But you're not cowering." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I remained silent. The food arrived. A pasta dish for me, and steak for him. Despite my anxiety, the aroma made my stomach growl audibly. Dominic gestured for me to eat, and I did, suddenly ravenous. "I've been thinking about our situation," he said after a few minutes of silence, "and I've come to a decision." Here it was, the real reason for this dinner. I set down my fork, appetite vanishing. "What decision?" "The child you're carrying is a Castellano," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "She will be raised as such, with all the privileges and protections that entails." "I won't give her up," I said immediately, my hand going protectively to my stomach. His brow furrowed. "I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking?" He set down his knife and fork, giving me his full attention. "I'm not asking, Sophia. I'm telling you how things will be. You and the baby will move into my home. You'll have everything you need. The best medical care, security, comfort. When the child is born, she'll have my name." The room seemed to spin around me. "You expect me to just move in with you?" "Become what, exactly? Your live-in mistress?" His jaw tightened. "You'll be the mother of my child. You'll be treated with respect." "But not as an equal," I said, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself. "Not as someone with choices of her own." "You made your choice when you decided to keep my child without telling me," he said, an edge creeping into his voice. Now we deal with the consequences. And if I refuse? His expression darkened. Don't test me on this, Sophia. You won't like the outcome. There it was. The thread I'd been waiting for, the confirmation of every fear that had kept me hiding these past months. So I have no choice, I said flatly. You have the choice to make this easy or difficult, he replied. But the end result will be the same. My daughter will be raised in my home, under my protection. As your possession, I said bitterly. As my heir, he corrected. Do you have any idea what that means? The life she'll have, the opportunities? The danger, I countered. The enemies, the moral compromise. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, that I would speak so boldly. You know nothing about my life. I know enough, I said. I've heard the whispers. I've seen the news reports about accidents that befall your business rivals. I know what protection money really means. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Then you should also know better than to refuse me. Fear closed my throat, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. When? Tomorrow, he said. A car will pick you up at noon. Pack whatever personal items you wish to bring. Everything else will be provided. Just like that, my life was being rearranged without my consent. I fought back tears of frustration and fear. May I be excused? I asked, needing to escape his presence before I broke down completely. He nodded once, and I rose, heading for the restroom on unsteady legs. Once inside the elegant space, I locked myself in a stall and finally let the tears come, muffling my sobs with a hand pressed to my mouth. When I'd regained some composure, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me seemed older somehow. Her eyes shadowed with worry. We'll be okay, I whispered to my bump. Somehow. When I returned to the table, Dominic was on his phone, his expression grim. He ended the call as I sat down. Is everything all right? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He looked momentarily surprised by my concern. Business, he said dismissively. Nothing for you to worry about. The dismissal stung, reminding me of my position in his world. Not a partner, not even a confidant. Just a vessel for his child. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. When we finished, Dominic escorted me outside, where the same car and driver waited. Tomorrow at noon, he reminded me as Anthony held the door. I nodded, unable to form words around the lump in my throat. Just as I was about to slide into the car, Dominic caught my arm gently. Sophia, he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it before. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I promise you, our daughter will want for nothing, and neither will you. His touch, the unexpected gentleness in his voice, sent an unwelcome flutter through my chest. I pulled away quickly, ducking into the car without responding. As we drove away, I watched his figure grow smaller in the rear window, standing still in the cold night air, watching until we turned a corner and disappeared from view. Elena was waiting up, pacing our small living room. When I entered, she rushed to me, searching my face for clues. What happened? She demanded. What did he want? I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. He wants me to move in with him, tomorrow. Her face paled. Dios mío. And if you refuse? He didn't say exactly, I admitted, but the threat was clear enough. Elena sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. Sophie, you can't. Men like him, they own people. He'll control every aspect of your life, of the baby's life. I know, I whispered, tears threatening again. But what choice do I have? He knows where we live, where you work. He has resources we can't imagine. If I run, he'll find me. And then what? So you'll just surrender? Elena's voice rose with disbelief. Become his prisoner? Not his prisoner, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. The mother of his child. He says I'll be treated with respect. Elena scoffed. Respect? From a man who threatens you, who gives you no choice. I had no answer for that. We sat in silence for a long moment, the reality of my situation settling around us like a shroud. Come with me, I said suddenly. He said I could bring personal items. He didn't say I couldn't bring you. Hope flared briefly in Elena's eyes, then dimmed. And do what, Sophie? Be your lady's maid? Live in his house on his charity? No, I have my pride, my independence, the independence I was about to lose. I'll visit, she continued, squeezing my hands. Often. And if he mistreats you in any way at all, you call me. We'll figure something out. We both knew there would be little Elena could do against a man like Dominic Castellano, but I nodded anyway, grateful for the fierce love in her eyes. That night, as I packed my meager belongings into a single suitcase, reality crashed over me in waves. Tomorrow, I would leave behind the life I'd built, humble as it was, to enter a world of luxury and danger. A world where I would be both protected and controlled, both valued and owned. All for the sake of the tiny life growing beneath my heart. The car arrived precisely at noon. I embraced Elena tightly, both of us fighting tears, then climbed into the back seat with my suitcase. As we pulled away, I watched my cousin's figure grow smaller in the window, just as Dominic's had the night before. This time, we drove to the penthouse where I'd worked for 6 months. The doorman, who had never before acknowledged my existence when I entered through the service entrance, now rushed to open my door and take my suitcase. "Welcome, Ms. Reyes," he said with a deferential nod. Marco was waiting in the lobby. "Mr. Castellano is in a meeting," he informed me, as we rode the private elevator to the top floor. "He asked me to get you settled." The penthouse looked different from this perspective. Not as a servant moving invisibly through its spaces, but as a guest being escorted through its grandeur. Marco led me not to the staff quarters, but to a suite of rooms I'd only cleaned when vacant. "These will be your quarters," he said, opening the door to a sitting room larger than my entire apartment. Beyond it, I could see a bedroom with a massive 4-poster bed, and a bathroom gleaming with marble and glass. "Your things have been unpacked," Marco continued, gesturing to a walk-in closet where my few items of clothing looked lost among racks of new garments, tags still attached. "Mr. Castellano took the liberty of having some appropriate items purchased for you. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, Maria can arrange alternatives." I ran my fingers over a silk blouse that probably cost more than a month's rent. "This is a lot." Marco's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Castellano wants you to be comfortable, but not free." The thought must have shown on my face, because Marco added, "He's not the monster you think he is, Ms. Reyes." Before I could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Maria entered, carrying a tray with tea and small sandwiches. "You must be hungry after your move," she said kindly. "Mr. Castellano asked me to make sure you eat, and the doctor will be here at 3 to check on you and the baby." "Doctor?" I repeated, startled. Maria nodded. "Dr. Chen is the best obstetrician in the city. She'll be handling your care from now on." So my medical decisions were being made for me as well. I nodded mutely, overwhelmed by how quickly control of my life was slipping away. After Maria and Marco left, I explored my new quarters, a gilded cage, beautiful, but still a cage. The sitting room featured comfortable furniture, bookshelves stocked with volumes I suspected had been chosen specifically for me. How much investigation had Dominic's people done? And a television discreetly hidden in a cabinet. The bedroom continued the theme of understated luxury, the bed dressed in linens that probably cost more than my car, a chaise lounge positioned near windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city, a desk equipped with a laptop and phone. In the bathroom, I found every toiletry I could possibly need, including pregnancy-safe skincare products and bath oils. The closet held not just everyday clothes, but maternity wear for every occasion. Casual, business, and even formal gowns. Every detail had been considered, every need anticipated. It was both thoughtful and terrifying. How long had Dominic been planning this? How many people had been involved in preparing for my arrival? Dr. Chen arrived precisely at 3, a petite woman with a no-nonsense manner that I found oddly comforting. She examined me thoroughly, asking detailed questions about my previous care. "Everything looks good," she said, as she listened to the baby's heartbeat. "Strong and steady. but I'd like to do a more comprehensive ultrasound tomorrow at my office. You're starting the 3rd trimester soon, and I want to establish a baseline. I nodded, watching as she made notes in a tablet. Thank you, doctor. She looked up, her expression softening. This must be overwhelming for you. The simple acknowledgement of my situation brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them away quickly. Mr. Castellano wants the best care for you and the baby, she continued. That I can promise you. After she left, I sat by the window, watching the city below. People moved like ants along the streets, going about their lives, free to make their own choices. A freedom I no longer had. The door opened without a knock, and Dominic entered. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, giving him an oddly vulnerable appearance at odds with the power he wielded. How are you settling in? He asked, crossing to stand near my chair. Fine, I said, not meeting his eyes. Dr. Chen says everything looks good with the baby. I nodded, still looking out the window. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture. This doesn't have to be a prison, Sophia. I finally looked at him, unable to mask my skepticism. What would you call it when someone is forced to live somewhere against their will? His jaw tightened. You're not a prisoner. You're free to come and go as you please, with security, of course. For my protection? I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Yes, he said simply. Whether you believe it or not, there are people who would harm you just to get to me. That's the reality of my world, his world. A world I'd been dragged into without consent. And what exactly is your world, Dominic? I asked quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like one built on fear and violence. He moved to the window, looking out at the city sprawled beneath us. For a long moment, he was silent, as if weighing how much to reveal. My father came to this country with nothing, he finally said. He built something from nothing, protecting our people when the law wouldn't. Yes, sometimes that meant violence. Sometimes it still does. He turned to face me, his expression hard. I won't apologize for who I am or what I've done. Every decision I've made was to protect what's mine. And now that includes me and the baby. I said, yes. The simple confirmation hung in the air between us. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. Acclaiming, what happens now? I asked. What does this arrangement look like day to day? He seemed relieved at the practical question. You'll want for nothing. Your job now is to take care of yourself and the baby. After she's born, we'll reassess. And us? I gestured between us. What are we in this scenario? A muscle ticked in his jaw. Co-parents. Beyond that? Time will tell. Not the answer of a man planning to force himself on me, at least. A small relief. I'd like to continue working, I said, surprising myself with the request. Not as a maid, obviously, but something. I have a business degree. I need purpose. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. We can discuss possibilities. One of my legitimate businesses, perhaps. The qualifier, legitimate, wasn't lost on me, a reminder of the darker aspects of his empire that would always exist in the shadows of our lives. And Elena? I asked. I want to see her regularly. Of course, he said, as if the request were trivial. She's your family. Your security will follow me everywhere? Yes, he said without apology. That's non-negotiable. I nodded, having expected as much. And the baby, what role will you play in her life? Something shifted in his expression. A softening around the eyes, a slight curve of his lips. I intend to be a father to her in every sense of the word. Present. Involved. Devoted. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Despite everything, despite the fear and resentment simmering inside me, I found myself believing him. What will you tell people? I asked. About me, about us, about how this happened. He considered this. The truth, more or less, that we had a relationship, that you're carrying my child, that you've moved in with me as we prepare for the birth. The details are no one's business but ours. A sanitized version of the truth. But I supposed it was better than some alternatives. I have a dinner meeting, he said, checking his watch. Will you join me for breakfast tomorrow? 8 o'clock? It wasn't really a question, despite the phrasing. I nodded, and he left, the door closing softly behind him. Alone again, I explored more of my new home, trying to adjust to the surreal reality of my situation. The closet full of clothes in my size, the bathroom stocked with products I'd never afford on my own, the sitting room with books that matched my tastes. All of it spoke to the thoroughness of Dominic's investigation into my life. I should have been more disturbed by the invasion of privacy, but exhaustion was overtaking me. The emotional toll of the day, coupled with the physical demands of pregnancy, left me barely able to keep my eyes open. I showered in the luxurious bathroom, slipped into silk pajamas that felt alien against my skin, and climbed into the enormous bed. Despite my certainty that I'd lie awake worrying, sleep claimed me almost instantly. The next few weeks settled into an uneasy routine. Breakfast with Dominic became a daily occurrence. Formal at first, then gradually more relaxed as we cautiously felt out the boundaries of our strange arrangement. He asked questions about the baby, about my health, about my preferences and needs. I found myself asking about his day, his business, though he kept details vague, shielding me from the aspects of his life he deemed unsuitable. Dr. Chen confirmed that the baby was developing perfectly. Elena visited twice a week, initially tense and suspicious, but gradually relaxing as it became clear that, at least for now, I was being treated well. My life became a strange blend of luxury and confinement. I was free to use the penthouse gym, the private library, the terrace garden. I could order anything I wanted, wear anything I chose from my expanding wardrobe, eat whatever I craved from the kitchen staffed by a private chef, but always, there was security. Marco or Anthony or another member of Dominic's team accompanied me whenever I left the penthouse. My phone calls were presumably monitored, my movements tracked. For my protection, Dominic insisted, and perhaps that was partly true. But we both knew it was also to ensure I didn't run. 3 weeks into this arrangement, Dominic approached me after breakfast. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "You mentioned wanting to work." I straightened. Interest piqued. The endless days of leisure had begun to wear on me, boredom and restlessness becoming constant companions. "My charitable foundation needs reorganizing," he continued. "The current director is retiring, and the operation could use a fresh perspective. You have a business degree, organizational skills, and from what I've seen, a compassionate nature. Would you be interested?" I stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Your charitable foundation? What does it do, exactly?" "Various initiatives, scholarships for underprivileged youth, medical assistance for families without insurance, small business grants in struggling neighborhoods." He shrugged slightly. "It was my mother's project originally. I've maintained it, but it needs attention." "And you'd trust me with that?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. A slight smile curved his lips. "You're carrying my child, Sophia. If I can trust you with that, I can trust you with a foundation." Put that way, it made a certain sense. Still, I hesitated. Would this be a real position, with actual responsibilities and authority? Or a make-work job to keep me occupied? His eyes narrowed slightly at my challenge, but he answered evenly. "Real work, real responsibility, real impact. You'd report to me, of course, but day-to-day decisions would be yours. The opportunity to do meaningful work, to have some purpose beyond incubating Dominic's heir, was too tempting to refuse." "Yes," I said, "I'm interested." He nodded, seemingly pleased. "Good. I'll have the files brought to you today. Take some time to review the current projects, get a feel for the organization. When you're ready, we'll discuss your ideas." It was the first time since moving in that I felt something close to excitement. Having meaningful work, being trusted with responsibility, it was a small step toward reclaiming some sense of self. The foundation files revealed an organization larger and more impactful than I'd expected. Millions of dollars flowed through it annually, funding everything from after-school programs to healthcare initiatives. The current director had done solid work but lacked vision, maintaining existing programs without expanding or innovating. I threw myself into learning everything about the foundation, identifying inefficiencies, imagining new possibilities. It gave me purpose, a focus beyond my circumstances. For hours each day, I could forget that I was essentially a captive, forget the complicated relationship with the man whose child I carried, and simply work. Dominic seemed pleased by my enthusiasm, reviewing my proposals with genuine interest, approving most of my suggestions. It was the first glimpse I had of him as something other than a feared mafia boss, seeing him instead as a businessman with sharp intelligence and strategic thinking. As my pregnancy progressed into the 7th month, my body grew more unwieldy, but my mind remained engaged with the foundation work. Elena noted the change in me during her visits, the spark that had returned to my eyes. "You seem better," she said carefully during one visit, as we sat on the terrace enjoying the early spring sunshine. "I am," I admitted. "The work helps. Gives me something to focus on besides—" I gestured vaguely at my situation. Elena's expression remained concerned. "Just don't forget what he is, Sophie." "What he did." "I haven't forgotten," I said quietly. And I hadn't. Despite the growing ease between us, despite the glimpses of a different Dominic, one who listened attentively during doctor's appointments, who remembered my food preferences, who discussed books and films with surprising insight, I never forgot how I'd come to be here. The lack of choice, the implicit threat, yet something was shifting between us, subtle but undeniable. I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not just possessive, not just concerned for his child, but something more complex. One evening, as I sat in the library reviewing foundation documents, Dominic appeared in the doorway. He'd loosened his tie, and his hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. A habit I'd noticed emerged when he was stressed. "May I join you?" he asked, an unusual formality in his tone. I nodded, setting aside my work. He poured himself a drink from the library's sidebar and sat across from me, his expression troubled. "Is everything all right?" I asked after a moment of silence. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "There's a situation developing, business. It may require me to be away for a few days." I waited, sensing there was more. "It could be dangerous," he continued. "I've increased security here. Marco will be in charge of your protection personally." Fear clutched at my heart, surprising in its intensity. "What kind of danger?" He met my eyes. "The kind that comes with my world, a rival organization making moves they shouldn't." The reminder of exactly who he was, what he did, sent a chill through me. "When do you leave?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tomorrow morning." He finished his drink and set the glass down. "I wanted to ask, if something happens to me, don't." I interrupted, a sudden panic rising in my throat. "Don't talk like that." He looked surprised by my vehemence. "It's just practical, Sophia. If something happens, Marco has instructions. You and the baby will be taken care of, protected. I don't want your money or your protection if it means you're dead," I said, the words escaping before I could consider them. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, followed by a warmth I'd rarely seen. He moved to sit beside me on the couch, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Sophia," he said softly, "after everything, why would you care what happens to me?" It was a fair question. Why did I care? This man had upended my life, had essentially forced me into a gilded cage. Yet the thought of him in danger made my heart race with fear. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do." He reached out, hesitantly, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "In another life," he said quietly, "we might have met differently, started differently." "Do you regret it?" I asked. "That night at the gala?" His hand moved to rest lightly on my belly, where his daughter grew. "How could I regret what gave me her?" His eyes lifted to mine. "What gave me you?" The words hung between us, charged with meaning I wasn't ready to examine. Before I could respond, the baby kicked, a sharp movement right against Dominic's palm. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "She knows her father," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes. "I want to be worthy of her, Sophia." of both of you." He leaned forward slowly, giving me time to pull away, when I didn't. His lips met mine in a kiss so gentle it barely qualified as one. A whisper of contact, a question more than a demand. When he pulled back, his expression was uncertain, almost vulnerable. It struck me then that for all his power, all his control, Dominic Castellano was just a man, flawed, complex, capable of both cruelty and tenderness. "Be careful," I said softly. "Come back safely." He nodded once, then stood. At the door, he paused, looking back. "Get some rest. I'll see you before I leave in the morning." After he was gone, I sat for a long time, trying to understand the tangle of emotions inside me. Fear, resentment, and something else. Something I wasn't ready to name, something that felt dangerously close to caring. Dominic was gone for 4 days. 4 days of increasing tension, as I caught snippets of hushed conversations among the security staff, as Marco's expression grew more grim with each passing hour, as Elena's worried calls went unanswered because I had nothing to tell her. On the 5th day, past midnight, I was awakened by voices in the penthouse, urgent, tense. I threw on a robe and opened my door to find Marco speaking rapidly into his phone, while 2 other security men moved with purpose through the living area. "What's happening?" I asked, my hand automatically going to my belly. Marco turned, his expression grave. "Ms. Reyes, please return to your room. Everything is under control." "Where's Dominic?" I demanded, fear making my voice sharp. Before Marco could answer, the elevator doors opened and Dominic himself stepped out, flanked by more security. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he held himself stiffly, as if in pain. Relief crashed through me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. "You're back," I said, the words inadequate for the emotion behind them. His eyes found mine across the room, and something in his expression softened. "Sophia," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You should be resting." I moved toward him without thinking. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," he said, but the tightness around his mouth suggested otherwise. Marco cleared his throat. "Boss, the doctor is on his way up." Dominic nodded, then gestured for the security team to give us space. When they'd retreated to a respectful distance, he reached for my hand. "I'm sorry if you were worried," he said quietly. "What happened?" I asked, studying his face, cataloging the new lines of strain around his eyes. "Business," he said simply. "Resolved now." I knew better than to press for details. Whatever business had kept him away for 4 days, had brought him home looking haunted and in pain, was part of the world he deliberately kept me sheltered from. "You should sit," I said, noticing how he was favoring his left side. "Until the doctor arrives." He allowed me to lead him to the couch, sinking onto it with a barely suppressed grimace. Up close, I could see a bruise darkening his jaw, a small cut at his temple. "It looks worse than it is," he said, catching my concerned gaze. I wasn't sure I believed him, but before I could respond, the elevator opened again, admitting a stern-looking older man with a medical bag. "Mr. Castellano," the doctor said with a nod. "Shall we?" Dominic squeezed my hand once, then released it. "Get some rest, Sophia. I'll see you in the morning." It was a dismissal, gentle but firm. I retreated to my room but didn't sleep, listening instead to the murmur of voices, the movement of people through the penthouse, the eventual quiet that settled over everything in the small hours of the morning. When I emerged for breakfast, Dominic was already at the table, dressed in a casual sweater rather than his usual suit. The bruise on his jaw had darkened, and he moved carefully, but his eyes were clearer. "Good morning," he said, rising slightly as I approached. "Did you sleep well?" The mundane question, as if he hadn't returned injured in the middle of the night, as if I hadn't spent 4 days sick with worry, sparked something in me. "No," I said bluntly, taking my seat. "I didn't. And I think I deserve to know what happened." He sighed, setting down his coffee cup. "There was a problem with a rival organization. It's been handled." "Handled," I repeated. "And that required violence?" "Sometimes," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Violence is the only language certain people understand." I looked away, reminded again of the gulf between us, the different worlds we inhabited, the different moral codes we lived by. "Sophia," he said, gentler now. "This is who I am, what I do. I won't pretend otherwise, not with you." "And our daughter?" I asked, meeting his gaze again. "Is this the world you want for her?" Something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps, or regret. "I want her safe, protected, loved, but also heir to all this," I gestured vaguely. "The danger, the violence, the moral compromise." He was silent for a long moment. "My father gave me this life," he finally said. "I didn't choose it, not initially, but I embraced it, made it my own. Our daughter will have choices I never had." "Will she?" I challenged. "Or will she be trapped by your name, your reputation, your enemies?" The question hung between us, unanswerable. Dominic reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I can't change who I am," he said quietly. "But I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to give her a better path and to keep both of you safe." It wasn't enough, couldn't be enough, but it was honest. And in that moment, honesty felt like the closest thing to common ground we could find. As my due date approached, the penthouse transformed. A nursery appeared adjacent to my rooms, decorated in soft greens and yellows, stocked with everything a baby could possibly need. Security protocols tightened. Dr. Chen visited weekly, then twice weekly. Dominic became more present, canceling meetings to attend doctor's appointments, asking detailed questions about my health, about the baby's development. I caught him in the nursery once, standing in silence, running his hand over the crib rail with an expression of wonder and terror that made him look suddenly young, vulnerable. Elena visited more frequently, her initial hostility toward Dominic gradually softening as she witnessed his genuine concern for my well-being, his growing excitement about the baby. She still watched him warily, still pulled me aside to whisper, "Are you really okay?" But the urgency behind the question had dimmed. The foundation work continued to give me purpose, a sense of identity beyond mother of Dominic's child. I initiated new programs, redirected funds to maximize impact, built relationships with community leaders. Dominic gave me increasing autonomy, seeming to take pride in my accomplishments. Our relationship evolved into something I couldn't quite define. Not love, not yet, but something beyond the captor and captive dynamic of those early days. We talked more openly, shared meals without tension, occasionally even laughed together. The kisses came more frequently, less hesitant, kindling a warmth that both frightened and excited me. I still had moments of resentment, of fear, of doubt. Still wondered if I was experiencing some form of Stockholm syndrome, finding affection for the man who had, in essence, kidnapped me. But then he would look at me with those dark eyes, vulnerable in a way he showed to no one else. And something in me would soften, would wonder if perhaps we could build something real from these strange beginnings. 2 weeks before my due date, I woke in the night to a sharp pain gripping my abdomen. For a moment, I lay frozen, uncertain. Then another contraction came, stronger than the first, and I knew. I reached for the phone beside my bed, pressing the button Dominic had insisted I use for emergencies. Within moments, he was at my door, hair tousled from sleep, eyes alert with concern. "The baby," I said, wincing as another contraction began. "She's coming." What followed was a blur of activity. Marco driving us to the hospital where Dr. Chen was already waiting, Dominic beside me, unexpectedly calm, holding my hand through each contraction, wiping my brow, murmuring encouragement. Hours later, exhausted beyond anything I'd ever experienced, I heard our daughter's first cry, strong, indignant, full of life. Dr. Chen placed her on my chest, this tiny miracle with a shock of dark hair and perfect miniature features. "She's beautiful," Dominic whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Perfect." I looked up to see tears in his eyes. This man who commanded an empire through fear, who had enemies willing to kill him, who had essentially forced me into his life, undone completely by 7 pounds of new life. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" I asked softly. The mixture of terror and longing on his face was answer enough. Carefully, I transferred the bundle to his arms, watching as he cradled her with infinite gentleness, as if she were made of glass. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." Something shifted in my heart, watching them together. This man and his child, his heir, his legacy. Not the legacy of violence and fear I'd imagined, but something new, something with the potential to be better. "What shall we name her?" he asked, looking up at me with an expression of such open vulnerability that it stole my breath. We'd discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at her, at them, I knew. "Lucia," I said. "It means light." Dominic's smile was radiant. "Lucia Castellano," he said, testing the name. "Perfect." Later, when Lucia was sleeping in her hospital bassinet and Dominic had stepped out to make calls, Elena slipped into the room, her eyes wide with wonder at her new niece. "She's gorgeous, Sophie," she whispered, gently touching Lucia's tiny hand. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I admitted. "Happy, scared." Elena studied my face. "And him? Castellano? How was he during all this?" "Amazing," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. "He never left my side, never faltered." Elena's expression grew serious. "Do you love him, Sophie? After everything?" Did I? The question I'd been avoiding for months now. The man who had upended my life, who had given me no choice but to enter his world. The man who had also given me purpose through the foundation, who looked at me like I was precious, who had held my hand through every contraction, who had wept at the sight of his daughter. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It's complicated, but I could. Someday." Elena nodded slowly. "As long as it's your choice, that's all that matters. Choice. The thing Dominic had taken from me, and the thing I was slowly reclaiming piece by piece. When he returned, Dominic carried a small velvet box. His expression was uncharacteristically nervous as he approached my bed. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the box. He sat beside me, turning the box over in his hands. "A gift. For Lucia. And for you, if you want it." He opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring. My breath caught. "This isn't a proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet. I know we have a long way to go, you and I. This is a promise. To Lucia, to give her the family she deserves. To you, that I will earn your trust, your forgiveness, your love, if you'll ever give it." I stared at the ring, then at him, seeing not the feared Mafia boss, but the man beneath, flawed, complex, capable of both darkness and light. "I can't wear it," I said softly. "Not yet." Pain flashed in his eyes, but he nodded, accepting. "When you're ready. If you're ever ready." He closed the box and set it on the bedside table. "It will be here, waiting, just like I will be." Lucia stirred in her bassinet, and we both turned to her. This tiny being who had brought us together, who had changed everything. "We're a family now," Dominic said, his gaze moving from our daughter to me. However unconventional, however imperfect. "A family," I echoed, testing the word, finding it fit better than I'd expected. As Dominic lifted Lucia gently from her bassinet, cradling her against his chest with such tender care, I realized that Elena was right. Choice was what mattered. And while my initial entry into Dominic's world had been choiceless, every step forward would be my decision. The future stretched before us, unwritten. A powerful man learning to be a father. A woman reclaiming her agency. A child who might bridge two worlds, nothing certain except that the path would be neither simple nor straight. But looking at Dominic with our daughter, seeing the love transform his face, I felt something unfurl within me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that from these strange, dark beginnings, something bright might grow. A new family, a new legacy, a new light in the darkness. Lucia, our light.